goal is not necessarily start a war, but increasing tensions. So U.S. can continue to sell weapons. It continue to reinforce its military posture in justify its military presence in East Asia. I think that's a main U.S. goal. What does Philippines gain out of this? Well, Bongbong Marcos might see some of the money. I mean, that's what the Philippines getting out of it.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah, I mean, how does that filter? How does that filter down to average Filipinos? I don't know.
No, yeah. This is the same arrangements that we see with South Korea and Japan, especially when it comes down to Japan in Okinawa. They've been arguing forever about the U.S. to leave. As a matter of fact, I remember having a conversation with Dr. Hammond, Ken Hammond. He's a Chinese historian specialist. I don't know if you know Ken, Dr. Hammond.
I think I heard of the name.
Yeah, a very, very, very knowledgeable guy. Well, he and I would talk, and because his specialty is about China from the 14th century all the way to the 18th. So he has a solid grasp of, and I asked him point blank, I said, Ken, what about Okinawa? Well, I said, yeah, Okinawa was never Japanese, historically speaking. So, and of course, I was floored when I heard that, because it was the first time I heard that. Most of the historical record that I read here in the U.S., including the Library of Congress, says otherwise. And here is somebody.
Actually, United States had a treaty with the Kingdom of Ryukyu, or Kingdom of Luchu. This was signed by Commodore Perry when he first sailed to Japan. He stopped by the Kingdom of Luchu on Okinawa, and he signed a treaty. This treaty is still preserved in U.S. This shows that Luchu Kingdom, or Kingdom of Ryukyu, if you use a Japanese pronunciation, was an independent sovereign nation at that time. It was only later annexed by the Empire of Japan, and during so U.S. occupied Okinawa after World War II, after horrendous Battle of Okinawa, in which the Japanese military forced a quarter of the inhabitants to commit suicide. They forced. This is like a real genocide. They say, okay, we don't want you to surrender to Americans, so you got to die for the emperor. So they forced 1/4 of the Japanese military forced 1/4 of the civilian population to commit suicide, and then but U.S. had basically occupied Okinawa after World War II. But in 1970s, so U.S. offered the local inhabitants a couple of choices. One, they would continue to be governed like basically a colony of the U.S., or they can be returned to Japan. And so at that time, the locals, they thought if Okinawa is returned to Japan, they will get rid of the U.S. military. That's what they believe.
Yeah.
That, okay, maybe if the island is Japan, at least we get rid of the U.S. military, which we had to deal with for since World War II. So at that time, they opted for return to Japan. But even after Okinawa's return to Japan, the Japanese government, they don't want any more American military on the Japanese main islands. They say, you know what, Okinawans, you guys have to take one for the team. We don't want Americans on the main islands, so we're gonna stick most of them on you. So essentially, the Japanese government didn't really treat the local Okinawans as they're treating them as second-class Japanese citizens. Essentially, they say, okay, you have to. So year after year, the people in Okinawa voted to get rid of the American base. Like majority of the Okinawans do not want American military presence there. However, the Japanese government continually overruling them because they don't want American bases on mainland Japan. they don't want them to be in Tokyo. So they want to stick them in Okinawa. So this is a major tension right now on Okinawa. Is most people don't want U.S. military bases because U.S. military bases bring crime. They bring crime, and that's and they're literally killing people because the U.S. That helicopter, what's that thing called? Osprey. They crash all the time on Okinawa and killing locals. So they want the military base off the island because the strategic position of Okinawa kind of half sitting between Japan, Korea, China, and Southeast Asia. Historically, it was a trading nation. It prospered as a trading nation, as a middle way point for trade. It wants to return to its historical place as the hub of trade connecting to all these places. It doesn't want to be a U.S. military base, but right now, U.S. military base occupy their most productive, most of the area on the island. Raise the issue, some Americans will say, well, but the Japanese want us to be there. But that's the thing, the Okinawans, they don't want you to be there.
Almost Americans do not know the history of Okinawa to begin with. And now, speaking of Japan, when I'm thinking about it, now the NATO is going to open an office in Tokyo. So that begs the question, what the heck is NATO going to do in Japan? That's a North Atlantic Treaty. What is he doing in Asia?
U.S. is desperate. U.S. is forming all... First, they had the Quad, right, which is Japan, U.S., Australia, India. But that was apparently not enough. So U.S. have to come up with AUKUS, U.S., Australia, and U.K. What the hell is U.K. doing in East Asia? I mean, Hong Kong hasn't been U.K. since 1997, right? I mean, what the hell is U.K. going to do in Asia Pacific? They don't even have a real Royal Navy flagship, HMS Elizabeth, was barely afloat. They had to cannibalize HMS Prince Wales to keep the HMS Elizabeth afloat. And then Elizabeth broke down, had to send back to port for repair. And while it's in port for repair, it caught fire.
Now, we understand a number of the sailors were drunk or had been drinking. Blow for the Royal Navy. For HMS Queen Elizabeth, it was just weeks after she entered Navy service in 2017 that a faulty seal on the propeller shaft was letting in 200 litres of seawater an hour. A couple of years later, she had to cut short her sea trials because of another leak. In 2021, just weeks before she was due to set sail on her maiden carrier strike group voyage to Japan, effectively around the world and back, she suffered from floods caused by burst high-pressure hoses. Effectively, the hoses that had been used to put out fires, their high-pressure saltwater system burst, flooding large parts of the ship. A similar thing had happened on board HMS Queen Elizabeth, on board HMS Prince of Wales, the sister ship. And when that happened, the salt water damaged miles and miles of the ship's electrics, delaying its program many, many months and costing many millions of pounds. When HMS Queen Elizabeth was sailing back from that carrier strike group voyage in November 2021, as she came through the Mediterranean, one of the F-35B Lightning jets that is based on board crashed into the Mediterranean, didn't really manage to take off. The most recent problem for HMS Queen Elizabeth before this fire was the propeller shaft incident when it was due to take part in the NATO drill. Sister ship HMS Prince of Wales has had similar propeller issues just as she was about to make an important diplomatic voyage to America. She found herself stranded in the Solent, and that voyage had to be aborted while she went back for repairs. HMS Queen Elizabeth took over. And while HMS Prince of Wales was in Rosyth shipyard in Scotland undergoing those repairs, we know that she was cannibalized for spare parts in order to keep Queen Elizabeth seaworthy.
So this is the state of Royal Navy right now. And so they want to deploy Royal Navy to South China Sea. And so apparently that's not enough. So now they're talking about NATO pivoting to Asia. I mean, what the hell is Europe's security interest in Asia, in Pacific? This is ridiculous. I mean, the real interest of Europe if at all, in East Asia Pacific is trade. It is trade. It's not military, but they're just here because U.S. want them, because U.S. have realized that U.S. alone might not be able to contain China, so it's trying to loop in all its vassal states to join in on the effort, and that's why you have NATO, you have Japan, you have Korea. They're all been beaten in line by the Washington to form this anti-China alliance. But I don't think it's gonna succeed. I mean, this is speaking of Japan, they are losing. So they're losing the Chinese auto market right now. The Chinese EV maker BYD, the head of BYD has specifically said him and BYD is gonna liberate the Chinese market from the Japanese brands, and it's already happening.
Wow.
Because Japanese automaker just 2 years ago had about 28% of the Chinese car market, and now it's already down to like 15%. In a matter of 2 years. 2 years. Toyota, they just lost their sales in China fall 36% in February. 36%. That's 1/3 of their sales. And Toyota's sale was still going up in North America and Europe. It went up like 16% in Europe and 14% in North America. But the fall in Chinese market is so large that their total sale global fall by 7%, because China is the world's largest car market right
for
now.
that. Yeah.
And the Chinese EV, they're actually not necessarily competing with Tesla. They're actually cannibalizing the traditional internal combustion engine car makers market. Now they have all these people who do like China bad videos. They show like tons of cars sitting in China unsold. A lot of these cars are actually internal combustion engine cars, because in March, in this month, China's new auto sale, 48% of new China auto sale is electric cars, is EV. 48%. That's almost like half of the new cars sold is in EV. So that is the future. That's because the Chinese market is where the money is. That's the world's largest market, and I think Japanese automaker is looking like they're gonna go the way of the Korean automaker in China, because the Korean automaker already they already couldn't compete anymore in the Chinese market, and I think Toyota is going to follow their footsteps, because at the current rate they're going. So I mean, this is maybe one reason, in places like Japan and Korea, they have a lot of anxiety about being outcompeted by China, and at the same time they're getting a lot of pressure from Washington to join this kind of anti-China alliance. This is my take.
Very, very interesting. How about if we talk about Hong Kong, Carl? What do you think from your perspective on the reaction to Hong Kong, the 23rd article? I mean,
look,
if any of us in the West knew the history of how Hong Kong was treated by the UK, they won't treat them nicely. And most in the West do not know.
These pundits in the West, they just have to make peace with the fact that Hong Kong is Chinese now. It has been Chinese since 1997.
Since 1997. Yep.
This is the thing is, like they talk about Chinese cracker. Have you guys? Many of them don't even aware what happened in Hong Kong. You say in 1960s, when UK have deployed troops.
Yes,
to Hong Kong,
I remember.
To put down the riots, and this is a contrast to 2019, when there's a lot of rumors about the People's Liberation Army is gonna send tanks to Hong Kong. It's gonna be a Tiananmen 2.0. None of that happened. China just let Hong Kong police to handle it, and the PLA stay in their barracks in Hong Kong. That was not the case in 1960 when you actually have UK deployed troops with their bayonets patrolling Hong Kong. Yeah, and people were actually killed back then. And so, but at the end of the day, people just have to realize Hong Kong is Chinese now. They're just like, the thing is, Hong Kong is because it's history as a British colony after Opium War till 1997. During the whole Cold War period, Hong Kong was a front line of the Cold War. It was crawling with all the intelligence services, MI6, CIA, everybody, and, like the intelligence services from Taiwan, everybody was in Hong Kong. And after the handover in 1997, the Chinese government largely have tolerated, they let things run as is in Hong Kong largely. But in 2019, I think that's when all the three-letter agencies, they have like put all their assets on the line to destabilize Hong Kong and China. And after that, China says, you know what, this is not acceptable. We're going to clean house. And this is why they came out first with a national security law, Article 21 and Article 23. I mean, this is all to kind of purge all these legacy of the Cold War from Hong Kong, so to speak. I mean, this is why you see our Radio Free Asia, which is a cutout, which is a CIA cutout. They have officially announced they're closing shop in Hong Kong, right? Because they're not going to be able to operate. Yeah, they're not going to be operate anymore under Article 23. And this is why you are seeing a lot of people upset in the mainstream media in the West, because Hong Kong is no longer a playground for all the spooks from everywhere anymore.
Yeah. And I did see the images of those who've been arrested that conducted the riots or demonstrations or whatever. And they were, I tell you, the signs that I saw, what the Chinese were telling them in Chinese, because I read the translation, like traitors per se, and they were arrested. So they're showing them for. I want to take one more other aspect before we open it for questions here. So now there is a conversation that the U.S. is saying, and this is, by the way, Hong Wang also said this as a question.